Hello again. Last time I made a video about how to create materials using the school textbook as a reference. And this week, or this video, I'm going to be talking about how to adapt materials that we find online to fit the needs of our classroom. Now, have you ever found something online that you looked at and you thought was going to be fantastic, and so you took it into your classroom, very excited about it, and used it, and it failed from start to finish? Just failed. You failed horribly. This happens to a lot of teachers. In fact, many teachers go through a time or period for whatever reason that they just decide that it would be better or more efficient to find materials online and take them into their classroom than to actually create their own materials. In fact, we live in a time and age, in fact, you're watching this, we live in a time and age where it's very easy to find a plethora of materials that we can take into our classroom and use with our students. But the problem is, and allow me an odd metaphor. The problem is that it's kind of like Frankenstein. You take foreign body parts and you smash them together and you end up with something that works, but it doesn't work the way that it should, and you often end up with frustration, and it can lead to the students actually disengaging, not only in the short term but the long term, because they'll just see your class as something that kind of burns the time. We need to make sure that our materials are consistent and useful to the students. So before we can begin the process of adapting materials themselves, we need to understand what level our students are studying at, and we also need to be able to assess the performance of the students in our tutelage. So are they high functioning? Are they low functioning? What I mean by that is, at what level do they speak English? Is it near fluent? Is it intermediate? Is it pre-intermediate? Are they beginners? We need to understand that before we can take materials into the classroom. This video is not necessarily how to adapt materials, as it is the type of questions that we need to ask ourselves when we are adapting materials, or even when we're finding materials and taking them into the classroom, to see if they're appropriate for the students that we're teaching. Also, these same rules apply to when we're making materials on our own. So it's kind of a, I don't want to say double-edged sword, but that's where I'm sticking with right now. So these questions are just examples, right? They're questions that I ask myself every time I make any materials at all. Every person, they're mine, and it's my process. And you are you, and you are not me. So you can do as you wish, and you can create your own list of questions as you wish, but I do encourage that you create a list of questions that you consistently ask as you create materials. Humans are not automatons, and so you don't need to be just like me. Question number 1. Is the material appropriate for the cognitive level of the student population? That means basically, can the students follow along with the concepts that you're studying, or with the type of materials that you're studying? So, example, you wouldn't ask a first grader to write a 5-paragraph essay, because this is just crazy, right? I don't want to say crazy. Anyways, it would be foolish as an educator, and so we need to keep that in mind, right? So one reason I stress using the textbook actually is that it provides the type of language that the students should be functioning at that moment, and also the type of materials that they can use, because the people who produce those do a lot of research and spend a lot of money putting those books together. So if the target language or activity itself is beyond, or too far beyond, or too far behind the cognitive development of your general population, students again will disengage in a number of ways that can have lasting ramifications. Question number 2, is the language too advanced or not advanced enough for the student population? In order to know how to answer this objectively, you need to be able to assess how your students' language levels are, how advanced your students' language levels are. There are a variety of means of doing so, but in the context of South Korea, guest English teachers, I suggest that studying the language of the lesson or unit that you're studying at the time is going to help you identify where they need to be. So the vocabulary and the language aims. Question number 3, do the students have experience with this type of lesson or activity? In other words, have students studied this type of material or done this type of activity before? I'm going to go off on a little tangent for a while to try to express this point. So I was asked by my school to teach an after-school class during the summer for some relatively advanced students for my middle school. That means they were advanced compared to the rest of the students at their school. I was pretty young in the field at that time, and so I decided to try to adapt a game of Clue to try to make class more interesting, so that they could have some intrigue and some interest, and learn how to differentiate and ask questions and find out information and guess. And I really thought it out a long time. In fact, I spent about 2 hours a day over a 2-week period putting this together. I made a board that could be projected onto the wall, onto the whiteboard, and made game pieces and hooked up magnetic strips to the game pieces so they could be moved about. And I really spent a lot of time. And we started the class, and on the first day I spent 15 minutes trying to explain what they were supposed to do. And then we spent the next 10 minutes frustratingly trying to play the game, and after 25 minutes the students were bored and their expectations had not been met. And so over a period of what was it, 3-4 weeks, I can't remember exactly, 3-4 weeks, my student population dwindled down from 15, which was the max for the after school class program, down to 7. And so they would come up with different excuses as to why they couldn't come, but really it was because I failed them initially. And as a side note, first impressions matter as an educator. And so we really need to make sure that the students can grasp what it is that we're trying to teach, that they've dealt with this type of stuff before. Question number 4, along those same lines, is it culturally relevant to the student population? I know I covered this concept in my last video, but honestly, I really cannot stress it enough. Every culture has its own virtues, and by that I don't mean good things or bad things. What I mean is every culture values different things differently. As an example, when you watch your television here in South Korea, you will find numerous music programs of every kind of swath, every kind of making, competition programs, or just regular people singing. And there are a lot of actually, now that I think about it, there's a lot of competition programs, but there are different kinds of competitions. And if you go to like a drinking area around here, you'll hear regular people singing from depending on where you're watching this from, karaoke bar, or they call it a norebang here, which basically means song room. You can just hear them on a Tuesday or Thursday or whatever night. You just hear them as you walk down the street. There's music playing everywhere. It's a very music-centric culture. But that doesn't mean that they like every type of music, and that doesn't mean that your student population will like every type of music. And so you really need to keep that in mind when you're presenting certain things. So I'll use another personal example. I had a co-teacher who loved classical rock, and he would do listen and write activities for classical rock, and the goal was to have the students listen and fill in the blanks and then sing the song. And most often, from when I was observing the class, I noticed that the students withdrew or they started mocking the song during the middle of it, and the teacher's feelings were hurt, and then he ended up it just ended up being a total, just a bad transaction. After the class was over, he expressed frustrations to me, and he stated when he was a younger teacher, he used to do the same type of activity with a lot of success. And I thought about it, and I realized that the activity was good. The idea behind the activity was good. It's just that the music didn't match the interests of the current student population. He was trying to use classical rock that he was into as a younger person to teach this idea, this concept to students that were not into classical rock. They're into K-pop or more popular music. So I took the same idea and I adapted it, and I used the song Lava, which was part of a Disney short that was popular at the time. And what I found was that instead of disengaging or even mocking, the students actually began to sing along by the third time that I had played the song. And the outcome was a lot different. And so while the idea was sound and I liked the idea, it was the way that it was presented. So all of these things need to be kept into account. As I said, this list of questions is by no means encompassing, and some of your processes might be different than mine. But as I said, you do need to create your own process or list of questions that you ask yourself as you're creating, or after you've created, or during the time that you are creating materials, before you present them to the students. Because by doing this, you're going to eliminate not all frustrations, but a lot more frustrations, and you're going to deal with any possible problems or issues that might arise during the class, because you will have thought about it ahead of time. Thank you again, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video.